Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed week 1 and are ready for week 2. I have a couple reminders about our YQ retreats coming up this spring. I am so excited about our guest list and hope you are too. For our senior high retreat, we have main speaker Bradford Rogers and SCU Worship as our main worship band for the whole weekend. These guys are going to be leading us in worship throughout our 4 main sessions and in a worship concert on Saturday night. We also have Miles Minnick joining us on Friday night and your favorite DJ, OJ the DJ, and DJ Miggs. For the junior high retreat, we have main speaker Colin Lancelot and our friends from right here at Briarcrest Worship. They're going to be leading us in all worship sessions and in a concert on the Friday night. We are so excited to party with you guys over both those retreat weekends, so if you haven't already, make sure you head to our website and register today. Make sure you're also following along on all of our social media and signed up for our newsletter, YouthQuake Today, to get all the information leading up to the retreats. We're so excited, and we'll see you then.
You are good when there's nothing good in me. You are love on display for all to see. You are life, you are light when the darkness closes in. You are hope, you are hope, you have covered all my sin.
You are peace when my fear is crippling. You are true, even in my wandering. You are joy, you're the reason that I sing. You are life, in you death has lost its sting. And oh, I'm running to your arms.
Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies.
Have you ever been really lost? Like really lost? Like you might be walking around town and you're lost. Or you were out on a hike and you got lost. Or maybe some of you are driving and you've gotten lost while you're driving somewhere. That is the worst. Now I drive a minivan. I'm a big minivan guy. And our minivan has this big screen and has a beautiful GPS in it. And I've learned over time to trust the voice in the GPS, to use the GPS. I mean, it doesn't matter if I'm in Vancouver, I'm going to Vera's Burger Shack, if I'm in Winnipeg and I'm going to Newburger, if I'm in Saskatoon and we're going to Fuddruckers, or if I'm in any city and we're going to Five Guys. It doesn't matter. I type it in, I listen to the voice, I follow it exactly to the restaurant. Because as soon as I think I can get there on my own, and even though I've been to all these places many times before, I inevitably miss an off-ramp. I take a wrong turn. Why is there a one-way street all of a sudden here? Why is it taking so long? All of a sudden the kids are screaming in the back, I'm getting hangry, and now the whole thing's a disaster and we are lost. Discussion prompt number 1 today. Tell your friends a time when you were literally lost. Go for it.
One time when I was biking with my mom, her tire popped and I didn't even realize it because I was singing a song, and so I got lost in my own hometown, which is an accomplishment, as my friends say.
There was this one time when my friend and I went skiing, and we decided to look for this one super difficult run, and it didn't have a sign, so we ended up turning into a mess of fallen trees and a creek.
The West Edmonton Mall when I was 4, and my grandma gave me the tickets to go on one of the rides, and I got lost literally. I think I went on the ride 3 times. My grandma left to go get some food, and I had no clue where she was afterwards. She thought I was still on the ride, but I was walking around and no clue where I was, just completely lost.
Last week we talked about knowing the shepherd's voice, the one who's guiding us through life. But just as important is trusting that voice, even when life seems to be on fire. In the book of Daniel chapter 3, we meet these 3 dudes named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel, the book, is about, of course, the guy named Daniel. And you know Daniel from Daniel in the Lion's Den. Now this is a few chapters before that. And these 3 dudes, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are leaders in a province of this king's country. King Nebuchadnezzar, he is a loose cannon. This guy set up a 90-foot statue, decreed to the entire country that they have to bow down to it. And every time they hear the sound of a horn, a flute, a zither, a lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, everyone's supposed to bow down. You hear a harp, bow. Hear a zither, bow. Hear a lyre, bow. Beautiful flute, bow. Other instruments. How do you even know what that bow? I mean, it's not even like a song about Nebuchadnezzar or a little cheer like Nebuchadnezzar, he's the best. Any of these random instruments, including pipes, bow. Here's the thing. The decree says if you don't bow down, you will be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now this guy wasn't healthy, but he wasn't messing around. So if you did not bow down to this 90-foot statue, you were thrown into that blazing furnace. People have got to be at this point like, tell me what a zither is. But these were things that were all part of this decree. Now, bowing down to man-made images like this is an issue. This is pretty clear-cut idolatry. And God's been very clear with his people up until this point that idolatry is very wrong, that they are not to worship anyone but him. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this posed a very big problem. They couldn't do exactly what the king wanted them to do and follow God at the same time. So they followed God. Now, a little while later, some narcs went to the king, told them that these boys were not bowing down when the zither was playing. The king was furious, off the handle, full of rage, furious. And he made these 3 dudes come in, asked him himself. They're sitting in front of this psycho king. He says to them, I hear you're not bowing down to my giant statue. statue. I'm gonna give you one more chance to bow down when you hear, lists off all the musical instruments once again. Horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes. At this point, like, Shadrach's gotta be like, is he bringing out a zither? Can we figure out what that is now? And Meshach's gotta be like, are they gonna bring out the other musical instruments? Abednego has gotta be like, what kind of pipes are we talking about here? Bagpipes? Can't be just plumbing pipes. Banging two pipes together? So this is an informational visit, as well as a dangerous one, potentially deadly, because the king says, if you do not bow down when all these instruments are played, I'm throwing you in the blazing furnace. And in response, the boys are basically saying this: look, king, we don't need to defend ourselves to you. Our God will rescue us regardless of what you do to us. And just to be abundantly clear, if he doesn't rescue us, we still would never bow down to your 90-foot statue. I don't know if you've ever talked to an unhinged psycho king who's threatening to burn you in a furnace right now, but that last statement from these boys probably did not help the situation. The king responds by saying, you know what? Fire the furnace up 7 times its usual heat. Get the strongest men in all of the country to come and tie them up. This is another reason to not get too muscular, because all of a sudden now the king has put these muscle-bound dudes in this awkward situation, and these 3 guys are like, of course I'm very muscular, I'm not very good at knots. This is more of a tying situation, not a strength situation. Is there a sailor available? Because this isn't my type of thing. I just lift. And so they pick up the boys, they tie them up, they make whatever loose knots that they could figure out, throw them in the furnace, but they got too close, and the furnace is too hot, and the muscle-bound dudes die. I think when we go to the gym, we want to think about a holistic approach. Don't skip cardio. Let's work on tone. Too much muscle might get you in a spot where the fire burns you to death. According to Daniel 3, King Nebuchadnezzar's sitting on a little throne watching this whole show take place. He's looking into the fire. All of a sudden, he sees 4 dudes walking around. And he's like, didn't we only throw 3 guys in there? And the guys were like, yeah, no, there were only 3 guys that we threw in there. He's like, I see 4. One of them looks like an angel is in there with them. And I like to think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are walking around in there playing a zither, one of them just 2 pipes, and the last one playing a lyre. This blows King Nebuchadnezzar's rage-filled mind. He's all of a sudden softened, and he looks in there and goes, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out of the fire. And they walk out unharmed. Not a hair on their head was singed. Their clothes don't even smell like smoke, the Bible says, which is an interesting detail to include. It's kind of nice because they can then wear these clothes later that week, like assuming they live. It's nice that you're not smelling like smoke. The king immediately praises their God as they get out of the fire. He says, anyone who speaks ill of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned to rubble. No one can speak ill of their God because no other God could rescue someone from this type of furnace. This king probably still needs some therapy, but it shows the power of God. It shows the power of trusting the voice of God. There could have been all kinds of reasons for these 3 dudes to get distracted from trusting God. Lives were at stake, their jobs were at stake, their relationships, their families. They kept their eyes on God. They were faithful through to the end, and God took care of them. They could have totally let the fear of that blazing furnace distract them from following God, but they didn't. They locked in. They knew his voice, they trusted his voice, and they walked in eyes open. And he was faithful. Your next discussion prompt is this: what are the things in your life that distract you from God?
Definitely schoolwork and stresses. Sports, I guess. I watch a lot of football, basketball, F1, stuff like that. And
I think something that distracts me from Jesus is my everyday routine. I forget to take time to intentionally do things outside of my routine. Focusing on Jesus while doing things that I do every day can be difficult.
I'd say sports and schoolwork. Sometimes I get too focused on how well I'm doing in those 2 things, and I don't spend as much time with Jesus as I think I should.
When I think about like school and like extracurriculars and like almost anything else, I always feel the need to like put that, like, I have to do this first, I have this homework, I have to do this. And I always push all my like reading the Bible or taking time before God, and I keep pushing it aside.
Honestly, the biggest one is homework, because I could say that all of the entertainment stuff could distract me, but I usually procrastinate when it comes to homework, and I can't seem to focus on the Bible. Whenever I try to read and I know I have an assignment coming up, I just can't focus. But I'm perfectly good to watch like a movie, and I'll still be stressed, but I can watch it, but I just can't seem to focus on the Bible. And yeah, that's probably homework.
You know, not everybody in the Bible is like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and completely distraction-free. There's a lot of stories of people like you and I who do get distracted, who take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and who end up living this life with Jesus as a process, trying to get better at it. But there's lots of mistakes that you and I make along the way, and that's okay. There's lots of examples like that too. There's a dude named Peter that we want to look at here in Matthew 14. And there's a story about Jesus feeding the 5,000. His disciples are out, and he does this miracle, and it's a beautiful story. And then after that, Jesus goes to pray on his own, and he sends his disciples across the lake in a boat. Cross the lake, I'll meet you later, he basically says. And he prays for a long time, like till 3 a.m. And at 3 a.m. it says that this massive storm pulls up, and the disciples are very troubled. And in verse 24, it says, "Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came towards them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In fear, they cried out, 'It's a ghost!' But Jesus spoke to them at once. 'Don't be afraid,' he said. 'Take courage, I am here.' And then Peter called out to him, 'Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water.'" I mean, it's not a bad move of Peter. He's like, if this thing that looks like a ghost is actually Jesus, and he's walking on the water, then maybe I can also try to walk on the water. Opportunistic Peter. So he calls us, says, "If it's really you, let me come to you. Let me walk on the water too." And Jesus says, yeah. Technically he says, "Yes, come." So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. This is a fascinating story of Peter because he shows the faith in Jesus. He shows the trust in the shepherd's voice to jump over the edge of the boat, to walk on the water. And while he has his eyes on Jesus, while he is trusting Jesus and the distractions are at bay, he's doing the impossible. He's a normal human man walking on the water towards Jesus. And it says as soon as the waves swelled up, as soon as the storm caught his attention, as soon as he took his eyes off of Jesus and onto the stress and the problems around him, he began to sink. And the distractions in our life have a way of taking our eyes off of God, off of the way we want to live. And we end up in a situation where we make some mistakes. And Psalm 23 is so focused on the shepherd's voice and him leading us through that we have to work hard at keeping our focus on the shepherd's voice. Not just knowing it, but trusting it, even when there's a lot of distraction and a lot of stress around us. You know, Psalm 23 says in verse 4, "Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid. For you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies." And like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego experienced, God shows up for his people in the darkest of valleys, when there is danger around us. And you know, Peter's story ends with Jesus reaching out and grabbing him. And even though Peter got distracted, took his eyes off Jesus and started to sink, Jesus still protected him from that water coming in over his head. And for you and I think there's an important note here. I think it's important to note that if we trust the Lord's voice, if we know his voice, we trust his voice, and we're working hard to follow him, it doesn't mean that the hard things of life are going to disappear. Again and again, it says, "You are with me as I walk through the darkest valley." It's not that he leads us away from any trouble. It's not that he leads us away from any stress or any hardship. We're going to experience that. But when we trust the shepherd's voice, we know we have a guide leading us down the path that we need to go. Just like the GPS, and just like the trust that Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego showed in God. And just like him showing up for those guys in the furnace, and like Jesus grabbing Peter and pulling him out of the water. When the hardest times of our lives show up, if we can keep the distractions at bay, if we can know his voice by reading his word, And if we can commit to following Jesus even when life is so hard, He is faithful to lead us to the place we need to go. Last week we talked about the sheepfold and the protection of the pen and the shepherd being there with us. If we follow His voice, if we trust it, if we know it, we end up living this life that Jesus has designed for us. We end up living in a situation where we have the Good Shepherd guiding us every step along the way. But it's okay if we make a mistake here and there. Peter made lots of them. And you know, Peter's story ends with him being one of the most influential people in the Christian church in all of history. Jesus built His church on Peter. When Jesus went back to heaven and they were setting up the early church after Jesus, Peter was instrumental in building that church. And so you and I, even though we make mistakes, even though our eyes can drift, even though we feel like we're sinking or we're in the middle of a fire at times, we can overcome the mistakes that we make, and we can keep following Jesus, because this is a process. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And like Peter, if our eyes drift and Jesus catches us, let's get those eyes back on Jesus, trusting His voice, following it, so that we can get down the right path and He can lead us to where we need to go. Our last discussion prompt today is simply this. Like Peter, we all make mistakes. So tell your friends about a time when you had too little faith, and let's learn from each other.
A lot of my mistakes come through arguments. Usually I'm like arguing with a friend of mine and I'll say some stuff that just I didn't need to be said. It's just kind of in the heat of the moment. But it's those kind of situations that later I'll sit down with them and we just get our emotions out. Usually out of those moments, I never expect it, but God's there.
I was leading a prayer session with some friends at my high school. I did not do well on it, and I kind of messed up a bit and repeated things a lot, but still in a way God provided, and people said it was good and all, even though I know I messed up.
I'm with a dance ministry called Refined Undignified, and there was one show where I just kept messing up over and over again. But afterwards, God showed me how that show impacted people, and it was really, really powerful to me.
So I was trying to pull off a prank to my friend. He didn't take it well, and he was really mad at me, and God gave me courage to apologize to him and make things right. So yeah, we're friends again now, so.